All right, let's dive in today. We're going deep on a topic that's, well, it's ancient, but it's also surprisingly relevant. We're talking about binding spells.
Ooh, binding spells.
Have you ever thought about them as like a form of energetic self-defense?
You know, it really is a fascinating concept. It makes you think about personal power and ethics and all these unseen forces that might be swirling around us all the time.
Exactly. I've got a whole stack of sources here. We've got historical accounts and modern interpretations and even, some practical examples. I'm curious, are binding spells really just about restricting someone or something? Or is there more to it? Is there like a deeper self-protection element?
Well, I think before we can even start to answer that, we've got to go back to the basics. Like, what are we even talking about when we say binding spells? It's not as simple as it sounds.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about it, my mind goes straight to like fantasy stories and making someone disappear in a puff of smoke. Poof, gone. Uh-huh. Not quite. It's a lot more subtle than that. We're not talking about banishing or completely getting rid of something. Binding is more about setting limits, creating boundaries, maybe even neutralizing harmful influences.
So it's less about like completely removing something and more about controlling it.
Precisely. And what's interesting is that the purposes for these spells, they can be so different. So you can use binding spells for protection, like to shield yourself from negative energy or from people who might want to do you harm.
Okay, that makes sense.
But you can also use them for self-control.
Oh, interesting. So like inner demons and things like that.
Exactly. Like, let's say you want to overcome an addiction or you're struggling with a bad habit, or maybe you just have those really annoying, intrusive thoughts that just won't go away.
Yeah, we all have those.
Right. Binding can help with that.
So it's not just about outside forces, but also those internal battles. I like that. Exactly. It can be very powerful for healing and closure. So helping you to sever ties with past traumas, maybe even unhealthy relationships. And sometimes they're even used for like justice, to set boundaries and prevent someone from harming others or even themselves.
Wow. Okay. So we're talking about a whole range of applications here.
Mm.
One example that I found really interesting when I was looking through the research was the concept of, what are they called? Freezer spells?
Or yeah, freezer spells. Those are
Huh.
fascinating.
Tell me about those.
They're really common in hoodoo and folk magic traditions. It's a great example of how you can use binding magic in different ways. So the idea is that you're symbolically freezing someone's negativity or their harmful actions, like you're stopping them in their tracks.
So we're not talking about like literally sticking someone in a freezer.
No, 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 not at all. Think of it more like, you know when you hit the pause button on a movie?
Okay.
That's kind of what a freezer spell is doing. It's using that idea of freezing to stop harmful behavior or energy.
I see. It's like hitting pause on someone's bad vibes.
Exactly. And I think that imagery really gets at the core of what binding is all about. You're restricting, you're containing, or you're neutralizing a specific influence.
Now, to really get a handle on how binding spells work, I think it helps to look back in time. It seems like these practices have been around for centuries in all these different cultures and traditions.
Oh, absolutely. The history of binding spells is so rich and diverse.
So paint us a picture, take us back in time.
Great, close your eyes. Imagine ancient Greece or Rome.
Okay.
People were using what were called curse tablets or depictions. They would use those to try and bind their enemies or to sway things in their favor.
So like an ancient magical restraining order.
Uh-huh, kinda. They
Yeah.
would write their intentions on these tablets and bury them or hide them. The idea was that it would bind the person's actions or their energy.
Wow. Pretty intense. What else? What other historical examples are there?
Well, as we journey through time, we come across knot magic, which is a practice that has been woven into witchcraft for centuries. Witches would actually use knots and cords to symbolically bind their enemies or to control spirits.
I've always found knot magic really fascinating. Just the idea that something as simple as tying a knot could have so much power.
It's really amazing, right? And
Yeah.
if you think about it, we still use knots today to remember things, to set intentions, to literally just keep things together.
Yeah, you're right. It's like a physical way to represent something that's not physical.
Exactly. And as we move a little closer to the present, we see binding spells pop up in traditions like Wicca, which became more prominent in the 20th century. But what's interesting about Wicca is that there's a really strong emphasis on ethics and responsibility.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we're talking about magic here, especially magic that could be used to influence or control. You've got to think about the ethical side of things.
Absolutely. And in Wicca, they have something called the threefold law. which basically says any energy you put out there is going to come back to you threefold.
So like a karmic boomerang.
Exactly. It's all about really thinking about what you're doing and the potential consequences, especially when it comes to binding spells.
Right. So it's not something to be taken lightly. That makes a lot of sense. But how do you know when it's okay to use a binding spell? Where's that line between protecting yourself and crossing over into, like, controlling someone or manipulating them?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And there's no simple answer, really. It takes a lot of, like, looking inward and understanding what your intentions are and
Yeah.
thinking about how it might affect everyone involved.
So there's no, like, ethical binding spell checklist that you can just pull out. Check, check, check.
Uh-huh, wouldn't that be nice? But the truth is, ethics are at the core of any kind of magic, especially binding.
Right. It sounds tricky. You know, when I was looking through all the sources, I noticed that a lot of them said binding spells should never be used for revenge or to make someone do something they don't want to do.
Absolutely. That's a really important distinction.
Yeah.
Are you protecting yourself? Or are you trying to control someone? Binding should really only be used as a last resort, you know?
So, like, if you haven't tried talking to someone or setting boundaries or even, going through the legal system, maybe binding isn't the answer.
Right. It's not about taking the easy way out or messing with, cause and effect.
Okay, so let's say someone's really thought about it. They've considered all the ethical stuff, and they're pretty sure binding is the right choice to protect themselves. Where do they go from there? What do they do?
Well, I always tell people the first thing is research. Like, don't just Google it or copy some spell you saw on TikTok. Really dig in. Find some good sources. You want to understand the history, the ideas behind the specific spell you're thinking about. And it's a good idea to learn from people who have experience with this stuff.
Right, it's like anything else. You wouldn't want to, I don't know, try to perform surgery after watching a 5-minute YouTube video.
Exactly. You have to respect the craft
Right.
and understand the power you're working with.
And that actually reminds me, when I was reading, a lot of sources talked about intention and visualization. Like, those are really important for binding spells.
Absolutely. It's not just about, like, going through the motions or reading something out loud. You have to really put your energy and focus into it. Visualization helps you to, like, direct that energy and shape what you want to happen.
It's almost like creating a picture in your mind of what you want to achieve and then using your energy to make it real.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And that's where, the ethics come back in. Because if you have bad intentions, if you're feeling negative or you just want to control someone, that's all going to get magnified in the spell.
Whoa, that's a little scary. So it's not just about the words or ingredients, it's about your mindset too.
Exactly. And that takes practice. You have to really know yourself. Before you even try a binding spell, ask yourself, do I really need to do this?
Yeah.
Am I doing this to protect myself, or am I trying to punish someone? Have I tried everything else?
Big questions, but important ones.
Right. And even if you have the best intentions, magic can be a little unpredictable. There's always a little mystery there, things we might not understand.
So you have to be open to, like, surprises.
Yeah, be flexible. Don't try to force things or get too attached to one specific outcome. Just trust the process. Be open to, signs and guidance, and be ready to adjust if you need to.
You know what else I kept seeing? Intuition. Like, a lot of sources talked about how important it is to listen to your gut feeling.
Your intuition, it's so important, especially with something as powerful as binding magic.
So if something feels wrong, if you're having second thoughts, maybe just, like, take a step back.
Right. Pay attention to that little voice inside.
Yeah.
It's usually trying to tell you something.
Now, I know we can't get into specifics about particular spells or anything, but I'm curious about the different types of binding spells out there. Like, can you give us an overview of some of the common categories?
Sure. So one that comes up a lot is protection binding, which is all about shielding yourself, from negativity, from harmful people. It's like you're putting up a barrier to protect yourself.
Like a magical force field.
Exactly. And then there's what's called self-binding, which we talked about a little bit earlier. That's where you use binding to help yourself overcome things like addictions or bad habits, or those intrusive thoughts that just won't quit.
That sounds powerful, actually. Like you're taking control.
Right. And then there are binding spells that are more focused on breaking ties with, toxic people, past trauma, stuff like that. They're used a lot for healing, for letting go of things that aren't good for you anymore.
To move on, to break free.
Exactly. And, just like with everything else we've talked about, all these types of binding spells come with ethical considerations. You have to think about the possible consequences.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about the history of binding spells, the ethics, different types. But I think the most interesting part is, like, how does this all connect back to the question we started with? Are binding spells a form of energetic self-defense?
Now we're getting to the heart of it,
Mm.
because in a way, binding is all about boundaries
Right.
and protecting yourself from harm, which sounds a lot like self-defense.
But where's that line? How do you know if you're protecting yourself or if you're starting to mess with someone's free will?
That's where it gets tricky, right? I mean, it really comes down to what you believe about, like, personal power and free will and how we're all connected energetically.
It's making me think, is there like a spectrum of binding? Like, are some types more intense than others? Maybe there's a difference between, I don't know, stopping someone from hurting you and like trying to control how they think or feel.
I think you've hit on something there. The intention behind the spell, the actual techniques you use, how much you're trying to manipulate energy, all of that matters. It all plays into whether it's ethical self-defense or something, well, something that's not okay.
So how do you tell the difference? Are there any like rules of thumb, questions you can ask yourself to make sure you're not crossing a line?
I think the biggest thing is always think about the other person's free will. Are you trying to protect yourself? Or are you trying to force them to do what you want? Make them think what you want them to think.
So respect their choices. Don't try to like take over their mind.
Right. And you also have to think about why you're doing it. What's motivating you? Is it fear?
Huh.
Anger? Are you trying to get revenge? Or are you really just looking for protection and peace?
Yeah, heavy stuff, but important.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, responsible magic is about aligning your actions with good intentions. It's about working with the natural flow of energy, not twisting it for your own selfish reasons.
It's a balancing act, right? Like finding that sweet spot between having power and using it ethically.
It is, and everyone has to find that balance for themselves. You have to really look inside, do your research, and really understand how magic works.
It's funny, as we've been talking about all this, it's making me realize that binding isn't just about magic. It's something we do in everyday life too.
Oh, totally. Think about it. We set boundaries with people. We put systems in place to stay safe. We even use, like, psychology to change our own thoughts and behaviors.
We're kind of all doing binding in a way, all the time, whether we call it that or not.
Exactly. It's all about using our energy and focus to create the life we want.
Wow, that's actually pretty empowering. It means we have more control than we think.
Right. And whether or not you believe in, like, the magical side of binding spells, I think there's a lot we can learn from the basic principles. Setting boundaries, protecting your energy, focusing your intention on creating good things.
This has been such a great deep dive, so much to think about. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but hopefully our listeners have some new ideas to play with.
I agree. It's a topic you could really spend a lifetime exploring.
So before we go, one last thing for everyone listening to think about. If binding spells really are a kind of energetic self-defense, what does that mean for how we think about personal boundaries? Can we really change the energy around us? Can we create a reality where we feel safer and more powerful?
Ooh, now those are some good questions. Makes you think about how everything's connected, and all the little ways we can impact the energy in our lives.
So many possibilities. If any of you listening have thoughts or experiences or questions about binding spells, share them with us in the comments. We love hearing from you.
Absolutely. We're all learning together, right?
Right. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.